Most people assume that once the federal government commits billions of dollars to a major technology program, that the outcome is essentially predetermined. I mean, after all, contracts have been awarded, vendors have been selected, and bureaucracies, they've been mobilized, right? The momentum behind these programs can be enormous, but sometimes the underlying assumptions are just wrong. And when that happens, someone has to be willing to challenge the prevailing view, present an alternative, and persuade decision makers that a different path is in fact possible. During my work with the Department of Defense, I had the opportunity to lead one such effort. And the result was a more effective communications system for the U.S. Army and a savings of more than $1 billion. Let me tell you how it happened. You know, America has a strong and effective fighting force. And one reason is because the Department of Defense invests huge sums of money in advanced weapons and communication systems. But sometimes these programs can actually be, shockingly, too expensive and even ineffective. And the problem is that changing these decisions, altering these contracts and awards, and finding a more effective solution can be difficult. In some cases, just not possible. However, if you understand government contracting and procurement decisions, changes can be made. And in this video, I'll explain how I led such an effort, one that resulted in the fielding of a more effective communications system for the Army and a savings of over $1 billion. Now, in the early 2000s, the Department of Defense decided to unify all of their communication systems development and procurement under one program. It was called the Joint Tactical Radio System, or as we used to all say, JITRS, right? It was a wide-ranging program that proposed developing a family of communication systems that would be used by every branch of the military and would allow full interoperability among the services. It didn't matter whether you were a dismounted soldier in the Army, whether you were in a tractor vehicle like a tank, whether you were in a fixed-wing aircraft by the Army, fixed-wing by the Air Force, a surface vessel from the Navy. It didn't matter. You would be able to communicate one with another. It really was a compelling vision, right? But if you're involved in the government, this won't surprise you. Like many government programs, it was not only unwieldy, it was extremely expensive. The cost of equipping every dismounted soldier in the Army with a jitter-supplied radio, each of which, by the way, would cost $37,000, would be $20 billion. This was in 2005, about 20 years ago, right? That'd be the same as saying to Congress, hey, we want to buy a BMW M3 for every dismounted soldier, right? Now, you may be thinking, well, Mark, you know, the government spends a lot of money in the military. I mean, what's $20 billion? So, fair question, right? So I reached out to one of our clients who was a three-star general, who was the military deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Control. That's ASA, FM&C. I just call him the CFO, right? And I said to, his name was Jerry, I said, Jerry, would Congress approve $20 billion, right? You know what he did? He laughed. He just laughed. He said, Mark, there's no way. There's no way that's going to happen, right? So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why didn't the Secretary of the Army just ask the JITRS program office for a lower cost alternative? Well, he had. And they said, no. The radio that was designed for the Army was the only one that could meet all of the Army's capability requirements. And guess what? Each one of those radios is going to be $37,000. So I'm sorry, Buccarino, that's what it's going to cost you. So go find the money, right? So that was it. It appeared that the Army was stuck with a radio they couldn't afford. The JITRS program was the program of record, and if you know government programming, that's the gold standard. If you've got the program of record, you have the official approval to build and field whatever it is, right? They were the official program of record for all communication system programs, and there was no alternative. Case closed. That's it, right? Or was it? So one afternoon, an Assistant Secretary of the Army reached out to us and asked a simple question. Is there any way that a contractor could design a low-cost soldier radio based on commercial technology, a radio that might be priced at $1,000, right? And he held in his hands a Motorola Razr. And he said, like this, only for soldiers. See, the Secretary of the Army wasn't convinced that a lower-cost radio that met the Army's needs was out of reach financially or technically. The problem is he needed facts that supported his supposition, and he needed a way to get his question answered within the bounds of the defense procurement system. That was his challenge. So here's what we did. The Secretary of the Army agreed to fund a special research project that we would lead, but was under the auspices of DARPA. This DARPA-managed program would explore the issues the Secretary wanted answered and would provide him the direction that he needed, whatever we found, right? And so with the funding in hand, we assembled a team of experts. Many were based in the U.S., others were located in the U.K., in Sweden, Italy, and in India. And you say, why India? Because at that time in the early 2000s, over 80% of the handsets, consumer cellular handsets in the world, were designed by a couple of companies in India. And we reached out to one of them and said, hey, we'd like your help in this process, right? So over a period of 9 months, we led this team to design a commercial-centric, low-cost radio for the dismounted soldier, a radio whose bill of materials, and if you know anything about engineering and consumer products, the bill of materials is the cost of the products or the items, the components that make up the final unit, right? So the bill of materials is all the piece parts, if you will. It could not exceed $250, and it had to be manufactured from U.S.-based components in the United States. The final cost of this radio would be $1,000. It turns out we could do that, which was the target that the Secretary had set for us. Now, when we completed the study, we briefed the Secretary of the Army on our results. And our team's research demonstrated that his vision and his desired objective, absolutely achievable. Yes, you can get there, right? Now, this is probably not going to surprise you. The results of this study were surprising to a lot of people in the Army because they had assumed that the JITRS program office had already done this kind of research and determined that a commercial-centric path like this wasn't feasible. They hadn't done the research at all. They had done what countless legacy government programs do. They worked within a set of assumptions and a cost model of what's called the organic defense supply chain. And then they told their government customer, okay, here's what's possible and here's what's going to cost you, right? And that's all the government customer understood, right? Which is what the Secretary of the Army kept hearing from the JITRS program office. We were the team that said, not so fast. You actually can achieve what you want. Now, when word of our study reached the JITRS program office, they were a little bit alarmed, like as in the head of the program exec or the PEO of the JITRS PEO jumped on an airplane from San Diego and hightailed it to Washington, right? He was worried. No one had ever challenged their assumptions before, and now the Army Secretary had the information needed to negotiate a different outcome. Now, not content with one study, the Army did, get it, 6 more studies, right? I mean, if anybody ever tells you the DoD is full of studies, they're right. It's study, 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 right? So we did the first, 6 more people confirmed exactly the same thing. A lower cost radio could be developed. So armed with that information, the Secretary went back to the JITRS program office and said, this is what I want. And they fielded that lower cost radio. They branded it the Rifleman Radio. At the time, it was priced at $2,800 each. No, not $1,000, but a hell of a lot less than $37,000. And within 2 years of procurement, I added up all the numbers, the Army had saved more than $1 billion by fielding the Rifleman Radio instead of the original JITRS design. Now, the Army ultimately fielded more capability to more soldiers at a fraction of the original projected cost. And what began as a simple question from an Army secretary led to a fundamental rethinking of the assumptions behind one of the military's largest communications programs. Now, I've never forgotten that experience because it taught me something important about government technology programs. The most important questions aren't really about the technology itself, although that's important, particularly if you're trying to involve and get active the commercial marketplace, which DoD is trying to do today, right? Often, the important questions about requirements, assumptions, alternatives, and even how decisions are made. And in this case, an entire acquisition program believed there was only one viable path forward, but one simple question from a senior government official revealed that that assumption was actually wrong. And that's one reason why disputes involving government technology programs can be so complicated, right? Whether the issue involves procurement decisions, contract performance, technology development, program management, government requirements, capability requirements as they're called, the key question is often the same. What assumptions were made? What alternatives existed? And were decision makers given the information they needed to make a sound judgment? Having spent years working with Army leadership, acquisition organizations, government program offices, and technology developers, I can help attorneys understand how these decisions are made and how programs evolve and how those decisions ultimately affect outcomes. If any of this resonates with you, reach out. Let's talk. Maybe I can help.